You know that moment or right after you finish recording a killer episode with a guest? You're energized, they're excited, and then the admin nightmare begins. You're uploading clips to Dropbox, emailing captions, sending transcripts, explaining file formats, and chasing follow-ups. Your guest wants to share their episode. They really do. But you've just handed them homework. What if there was a better way? Today we're talking about Podshare, a tool that's rethinking how we set our guests up for success. If you're creating a podcast in Nigeria or about Nigerian culture, make sure you're part of a permanent record. The Nigerian Podcast Index is a free, independent directory that helps listeners discover Nigerian podcasts and ensures our stories are preserved for future generations. Head to nigerianpodcastindex.com/submit to add your show to the index. Whether you're talking politics, pop culture, business, or just keeping it real about life in Nigeria, your voice deserves to be heard and remembered. Again, that's nigerianpodcastindex.com/submit. Let's build the archive together.
Hi, I'm Jolaade, and I lead media and communications at a company called Unreasonable Group. I'm a bit of a generalist, so I've spent a lot of time working on different things like photography, cinematography, video post-production. And most recently, I spent a lot of time building products on the side. And this is Into the Podverse with Tony Doe.
This is Into the Podverse with Tony Doe. Podcast innovations, challenges, opportunities, and culture from an African perspective.
What frustrating podcast workflow problem made you say, there has to be a better way than scattered Google Drives, email chains, and endless link hunting?
I currently lead podcast production at Unreasonable Group, which means a lot of my week is coordinating guest assets around episode launches. And the thing that actually pushed me to build something was a single email that I'd written to one of our guests that came on, our show. And I was reading that email again. I was rereading it about an hour later after I'd sent it. And even I myself, I couldn't make sense of it. It wasn't that the email didn't make sense. It just felt like a lot, if that makes sense. So there were links to a couple of video excerpts in one place. There was another link to another separate doc with the accounts that she can tag when the guest eventually posts. There was another drive folder somewhere else with the flyer. And then we had another suggested caption buried somewhere else in the document. So it was the kind of email that almost needs a follow-up apologizing for the previous one. And in my head, I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense, right? If you think about it. And the bigger thing underneath that is that there's a lot of focus on tools for hosting podcasting, right? Like that. Because when I sent all of that, I'm like, how come there's no single place, a single link to just house all of this information? And because it wasn't a one-off thing, in my head, I'm like, there should be a way to make this a repeatable process. And what I realized is that there's so much focus. If you go ahead and Google tools for podcast, most of the things you would see are tools targeted at, the host, which, makes sense in some way. But then most of the conversation is about, the host's workflow, things like recording, editing, distribution, growth. And there's not much focus at all on what the experience is like for the person who actually comes on the show. And some people frame the guest side of things through reach, meaning that, if you want to make it easy for your guests to share more of your podcast excerpts. And then if you do that, it means your show grows. And that's debatable. It's not the fact that a guest shares, about the podcast doesn't automatically means that particular episode is going to, blow out and all of that. I mean, that's very debatable. But for me though, I work at a company called Unreasonable Group, like I said earlier. And one of the things you absorb from being there is that we care so much about detail. Like we care much about, doing things that will make every experience memorable. And we have this culture of, whatever it is you do, you have to be very, very intentional. So at work, I'd watch colleagues take genuine care of, of our fellows, of our mentors that come to our programs. And then I'd go home and send a guest an email with like I don't know, 5 drive links. And the contrast eventually started to feel a bit absurd because this is somebody, and you think about the guest here, this is somebody who has given you an hour of their time, usually for free, at a point in their week where they probably didn't have an hour to spare. And the way, they receive everything afterwards should feel like you noticed that, should feel like, you appreciated that effort. And the current default is that it doesn't. And I find that a bit strange. So Podshare is my attempt at making that experience better for the guest, right? Like I said, the entire world is currently focused on the host. How do we make the host experience great? But I'm like, maybe not just the host, maybe the guest as well.
Podshare promises one clean link per episode. What exactly does that replace in a podcaster's current process? And how much time or friction does it realistically save creators and guests?
So for Podshare, the specifics of what it replaces are actually quite long when you list them out, which I think is partly why the current state of things looks the way it does. Because when you think about it, nothing about the existing setup was really designed. It was just something that accumulated, if you think about it. Because on the side of the host, you're essentially replacing the creation of a drive folder for every guest and the naming and structuring of all the assets in that folder. And then the long email you have to send to the guest explaining that, this is where you find X, this is where you find Y, this is where you find all of this. And also you then have to, send a specific caption for each platform. You have to write that for LinkedIn. What works on LinkedIn doesn't work on Instagram, and what works on Instagram doesn't really work on X. So you're replacing all of that. And then even on the side of the guest also, you're replacing the experience of trying to navigate someone else's drive folder, because that's another hassle on its own. Or even, and it's not just Google Drive, sometimes it's Dropbox and, sometimes it's Notion, for example. So you're replacing all of that. And when you think of how much time it adds up, when I look at myself and then a couple of users that have started using it, it saves about at least 1 to 2 hours. And the good thing about Podshare is you just have to set up a lot of things once and you never have to set it up again. So you might spend about 30 minutes setting up your show, and then that is all you ever have to do, really, because now a lot of the assets, a lot of the things are reusable in terms of they are already templated, and that saves a lot of time.
Was this built for podcast guests, guest management, PR teams, or media consultants? And did your original audience surprise you?
Podshare was primarily built for podcasters, or should I say was primarily built for me as someone who currently produces a podcast, right? And so essentially it's for anyone who brings in guests on their podcast, if that makes sense. And I think it's even the people I've been reaching out to, the people who have signed up so far, they've just been either agencies who are actually managing lots of shows, or indie podcasters who have their own show. So those have been the people. I don't think I have any other category of, and obviously people, marketing folks who are producing podcasts at their own company as well. Yeah.
In the growing ecosystem of podcast tools, what makes Podshare different from a Linktree, Notion page, or standard media kit?
I think when I think about this question around, how Podshare is different from tools like Linktree, Notion page, or a standard media kit, the honest answer is that all of these tools can they can do what Podshare does if you set them up carefully. So the comparison isn't really fair to any of them. And I'm not trying to dunk on Linktree or any of that, but the way I'd put it is that Podshare isn't trying to add a sophisticated new layer on top of podcasting workflow. It's just trying to be the right shape to do one specific job and to do it right? A lot of other tools, they're doing their thing well. They're built for different things. They're not built for this single thing, right? Linktree is built around the person whose profile it is. Notion is built around whoever is organizing the page. A media kit is built around the brand. And they are all in their own ways host-centric or sender-centric, which is fine because that's what those tools are for. And what doesn't really exist, or what didn't really exist as far as I could tell, was anything actually shaped around the experience of receiving an episode's worth of assets, which is what almost every guest of every podcast is doing all the time. And this is what I mean, right? For the guest, number one, you're saving so much time. Let's say you're using Notion, right? You create a Notion page. And then it means that every time there is a new episode, you duplicate that Notion page. Then you change a few information, then you send it. But it's still a Notion page, right? It's not built for that purpose. But you could do that, which is great. But the thing with Podshare is basically you set it up once and you almost have every other thing set up for you. And then you have different things that you can also do. There's so much you can do in terms of add caption, generate that using AI, edit it. And then also how it is presented to the guest is way better than, I don't know, any other tools out there currently that I've seen that does specifically that. And there's this thing about when you have somebody or a tool that is obsessed about doing one single thing, like it's just going to be an overall better experience. Like think of a tool that does just one thing, one tool that you really love. And one of the reasons you love it is because there's one thing it does and it does that one thing really well. And that's the case with Podshare, essentially. Yeah.
Do you see Podshare staying a simple utility, or is this the foundation for a bigger creator infrastructure play, something closer to the operating system for podcast collaboration?
So I'd like to grow Podshare into something bigger, but I'm careful about how I say that because there's a version of this that turns into like a CRM, and I don't want to be a CRM, like a CRM for everything podcast or podcasting. But then the philosophy underneath Podshare, if I had to write it down, is that the experience of receiving things from a podcast is currently not that great, and it could be way better. And that principle quite naturally extends beyond guests, if you think about it. Sponsors receive things from shows, agencies do, press contacts do. Everyone is all getting some version of the long email with, drive links, and they probably deserve something better too. So the thing I'm sure about when it comes to Podshare is the philosophy. And the only thing I'm not sure about is the shape it ends up taking, right? So whether it grows into the layer between shows and everyone they interact with, or it stays as a tiny tool that people use like 5 times a week. I'm honestly not sure yet. My thinking is that, you make the simple thing genuinely good first and let people using it show you where it usually wants to go. And if you think about some of your favorite tools, right, the ones you really, really love, you realize that they do one thing and they do it really, really, really well. And that's where I'm going with Podshare. It's like, I wanted to do one single thing, just that one thing. I want to do it so well that it becomes undeniably good at that thing, that everyone comes to it for that. And that's the basically, sharing of assets when it comes to podcasts, right? And then, yeah, because even now at its current stage, which I think it's in a good state, I feel like it could be way better. There are a lot of things there are a lot of ideas I have, which are not essentially features, but improvements on how it currently exists. So yeah, to answer your question, I'd probably rather grow slowly than figuring out, what it's going to grow into. I'm trying to just nail this part well, which is why I'm very, very keen on feedback, which is why I appreciate the fact that, when I reached out to you, Tony, you were happy to, to hear me out. And then every other person who has, tried out the tool or is currently using the tool, shout out to everyone. And if you want to get on the tool, you can, it's easy to self-service. But then if you want to chat, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm always happy to take feedback. So yeah, thank you very much.
Speaking of hosting, Into the Podverse runs on rss.com, and I've been really happy with their platform. If you're thinking about starting your own podcast or you're looking to migrate from another host, I have an affiliate link in the show notes that'll help you get started. Full disclosure, I do get a small commission if you sign up through my link, but honestly, I'd recommend them either way. They've been solid for reliability, their interface is intuitive, and their support team actually responds when you need help. Check out the link in the show notes if you want to give them a try.
That's it for this episode. Subscribe, share, and connect at Tony Doe Media. See you in the Podverse.